Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you officially for joining the Rural Violent Crime Reduction Initiative Solicitation Webinar, or RVCRI for short. Before we do dive in to our webinar today, I do want to provide a few logistics announcements. One, as you heard, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the RuralVCRI.org website for future access. For today's event, all attendees have been muted to prevent background noise from coming in. At the end of today's event, you will be directed to a brief evaluation survey. That survey should only take a few moments, and we do appreciate any feedback that you all are able to provide. We use that to improve for our future events. Throughout today's webinar, there will be 2 interactive polls that will appear on your screen throughout the presentation. Those polls will ask you about your familiarity with grant funding and what you hope to fund if you were to be awarded an RVCRI grant. And then finally, we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So if you do have a question at any point during today's event, please feel free to enter those into either the chat or the Q&A feature that you see along the bottom of your screen. Joining me for today's event is both myself at the National Policing Institute. I'm a program manager. Juliana Palmer is a policy advisor for the Bureau of Justice Assistance. And John Connolly is a senior program officer with the Local Initiative Support Corporation, or LISC. So what we hope to accomplish with today's event is to answer a few questions for you all. So those are: what is the RVCRI? Who is the RVCRI team? Who is eligible for a grant? What are the responsibilities of those who are awarded an RVCRI grant? How do I apply? What are allowable costs under the RVCRI? When are those applications due? And how can I get in contact with the RVCRI team if I have any questions? So before we dive into that agenda, the first poll is going to appear on your screen. With the question of, has your agency received any kind of grant funding in the past? So your answer options for this poll are federal funding, state funding, local funding, none, or I'm unsure. So you should see that poll now appearing on your screen. We'll give you all a few moments to respond to that. Great, everybody is responding very, very quickly to this first poll. So I'm seeing in current responses right now a mixture of several have received state or federal funding. A few of you have received local funding in the past. Some of you are unsure, and some agencies have not received any funding. But it looks like the majority of folks are answering that they've received either state or local or state or federal funding at some point. Okay, great. Thank you all for answering that poll. We will go ahead and close that poll out and move forward with our presentation. So what is the RVCRI? It is a competitive grant and training and technical assistance, or TTA, program that is funded by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and supported by both the National Policing Institute and LISC. It is meant to support law enforcement agencies who are looking to address violent crime challenges in rural areas. Grants can support various aspects of policing, including improving investigations, implementing violent crime reduction strategies, and enhancing collaboration between local stakeholders. The objectives of the RVCRI are to assist agencies in identifying rural crime problems, helping to fund and deploy resources to address that identified challenge, and that could include personnel deployments, services, technologies, or softwares. To document how personnel and resources will be used in furtherance of an area's crime reduction strategies. And then lastly, to track those project outcomes to determine if the violent crime reduction strategy, or strategies in some cases, have had an impact. This program is specifically designed to support rural and tribal law enforcement agencies, and awardees will have access to not only the funding that's provided under this grant program, but also tailored TTA from subject matter experts to ensure successful strategy implementation, support from and access to a TTA provider, in this case, either the National Policing Institute or LISC, that's dedicated to helping agencies navigate the grant and reimbursement process, and no-cost training opportunities, knowledge sharing events, peer-to-peer networking, and resources. So the awards are competitive in nature, as we just discussed, and can range from funding of $25,000 up to $150,000 and will cover a maximum grant period of 24 months. Grants can be used to train and hire personnel to address violent crime, expand victim services, community-based crime prevention programs and partnerships, enhance your crime analysis capacity, implement problem-oriented policing strategies, improve stakeholder collaboration and communication, and purchase and deploy technologies or softwares that directly address violent crime. So now you've heard a little bit about what the program is, and here on the map, you'll see existing grantees that we currently have. You can see they cover the United States. This map on the website is interactive, so if you were to view it, you'd be able to hover over it and get additional details about these agencies. But there were, in the initial cohort, 21 direct funded agencies who came in under the Bureau of Justice Assistance. In the December 2022 application cohort, the Institute and LISC awarded an additional 33 agencies. And those agencies come from a variety of backgrounds. Some are local police departments, some are sheriff's offices, district or prosecuting attorney's offices, tribal law enforcement, college or university police departments, as well as state agencies. And they are implementing a range of initiatives. Examples include deploying automatic license plate readers, implementing or enhancing victim services programming that they have, implementing CVI programs, and deploying personnel such as school resource officers or overtime and specialty deployments. So now that you've heard what the program is, some existing grantees that are in the program, I'd like to introduce you to the RVCRI team. So first, I will turn it over to Juliana Palmer with the Bureau of Justice Assistance to introduce you to BJA. Juliana?
Thanks, Sam, for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Juliana Palmer. I'm a policy advisor at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and I just wanted to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about BJA, who we are, and where we sit within the Department of Justice. We are housed in the Office of Justice Programs, which provides grant funding, training, research, and statistics to the criminal justice community across a very wide and diverse range of topics. Within OJP sits the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is where I'm from, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the National Institute of Justice, the Office for Victims of Crime, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and the Office of Sex Offender Sentencing, Monitoring, Apprehending, Registering, and Tracking. Dan, you can go to the next slide. BJA provides leadership and services in grant administration and criminal justice policy development to support state, local, and tribal justice strategies. We work with organizations throughout the country on a wide variety of areas with the goal of reducing crime, recidivism, and unnecessary confinement. Next slide. BJA is led by Director Carlton Moore, who was appointed by President Biden in February 2022. He oversees all of BJA's programmatic and policy efforts and all of the work that BJA does with law enforcement, courts, corrections, treatment, reentry, justice information sharing, and more. Next slide. At BJA, we have 5 major focus areas, which includes improving public safety through measures that build trust with the community and ensures an effective criminal justice system, reducing recidivism and preventing unnecessary confinement and interactions with the criminal justice system, integrating evidence-based research strategies, increasing program effectiveness through data analysis, information sharing, and performance management, and ensuring excellence through oversight of our strategic investments. Next slide, Sam. And we accomplish all of those 5 major focus areas through funding, educating, equipping, and partnering. The reason we're all here today is a perfect demonstration of that. BJA appreciates the work that the National Policing Institute and the Local Initiative Support Corporation is doing in the work around violent crime reduction. We really look forward to the opportunity to work with a lot of you moving forward. And that is all that I have for you today. I look forward to any of the questions that anyone has at the end of the call, and I will hand it back over to Sam. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Juliana. So you've heard a little bit about BJA, and as Juliana mentioned, we work very closely together. So here at the National Policing Institute, or what was formerly known as the National Police Foundation, we are a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to advancing policing through innovation in science and scientific research. And we envision that the best way to do that is by police and communities working together to implement those best practices over time. So we do, in addition to the Rural Violent Crime Reduction Initiative, have several other programs that we work with, both the BJA and other Office of Justice Program offices on, including things such as the Crime Gun Intelligence Center Initiative, or CS360, as well as several initiatives around officer safety and wellness. For the Rural Violent Crime Reduction Initiative, we do have a partner with us, and that is the Small and Rural Law Enforcement Executives Association. They are a newer group, but they are dedicated solely to supporting and promoting law enforcement executives and agencies that serve small, rural, and tribal population. And their main mission and goal is to really strengthen, unite, and raise the capacities of those departments. So with that, I will now turn it over to our partners at LISC. So John Connolly, I will let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Sam, and good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to any friends on the West Coast. As introduced, my name is John Connolly, Senior Program Officer with the Safety and Justice Team at LISC. And as you see on the slide, and as Sam mentioned previously, LISC stands for Local Initiative Support Corporation. We're a national nonprofit, and we're one of the country's oldest and largest community development intermediaries. We marshal public and private resources and deploy those to the field. Resources such as grants, loans, and equity investments. We support the field through a network of over 40 local offices across the country. We also have a rural program that you see on the slide that serves over 2,400 rural counties and is now in 49 states and the territory of Puerto Rico. And we also have national programs at LISC that support the field, including the Safety and Justice Team. And we're the oldest national program at LISC and have supported dynamic community safety partnerships across the country since 1994. And we look forward to continued discussion of this important funding opportunity and look forward to answering your questions. With that, happy to turn it back over to you, Sam.
Great, thanks so much, John. So now that you've met the team, what will that team, what is their role in this program and how will they help? So the RVCRI team will help provide comprehensive recommendations to ensuring that you meet the key elements of the proposal that you outline in your application if awarded. We will also create a repository of evidence-based best practices, which will be updated on a regular basis. That clearinghouse is available on the RuralVCRI.org website on the clearinghouse tab. We are adding and updating to that on a regular basis. We will help support the establishment of clear data collection processes to help measure the outcomes of your strategies and identified plans. We will provide grant management support to help you all along through the process. As you indicated in the initial poll, some of you do have experiences with grants, both at the state and federal levels. Others, this would be a new endeavor. We will conduct regular meetings to help track the progress and identify TTA and peer learning opportunities. And those could include, but are not limited to, implementing community engagement strategies, looking at problem-oriented policing or problem-solving models, helping strengthen any partnerships that you have in your communities or establish new ones, enhancing your crime analysis capacity, or helping you hire and deploy, or in the case of technology, purchase and deploy personnel, technologies, or softwares. So who is eligible to become an RVCRI grantee? Any publicly funded rural law enforcement agency, any local or county law enforcement agency that serves a rural population, any federally recognized tribal law enforcement agency, or any rural county prosecutor's office who are looking to address a violent crime problem or challenge that you're experiencing in your community. One thing that I do want to highlight here is that your jurisdiction does not have to be exclusively rural. but must serve a rural area within that jurisdiction. So for instance, if you are a county that potentially has a larger county seat, which may not technically qualify as rural in there, but you're looking to service the areas outside of that, you would be eligible. The Institute, BJA, and LISC do have a tool that is available on the RuralVCRI website that we use called the Health Resources and Services Administration tool that does help give an idea on eligibility. That is meant to be a guide to help. It is not meant to be a definitive eligibility determiner. So if you do get on the website and use the tool and you see that your agency is not designated as rural by that tool, but you feel that you have a strong case for why you would, please feel free to reach out to us and we can talk about that. Our email address, and this will be on a contact slide at the end of today's presentation as well, so if you don't catch it this time, that's okay, is RuralVCRI@policinginstitute.org. We are happy to talk through eligibility criteria with you. What would be the responsibilities for your agency if you were to be awarded an RVCRI grant? You would need to engage in regular contact with your TTA provider or funder. So in this case, either ourselves here at the National Policing Institute or John and his team at LISC. You will be required to provide regular reporting updates, including crime metrics when those are applicable, that would allow to show a pre and post implementation comparison. You would need to purchase all equipment and services in a manner that's compliant with both the federal and local procurement guidelines of your agency. You would request reimbursement for those purchases in a manner that's consistent with any guidelines of the grant, which would be provided to you if awarded. You would need to follow all special conditions and government requirements of receiving that grant, which would be outlined in your award notification package. And you would contribute to the development of an annual and final report that discusses your project progress, any successes that you achieved, any challenges that you overcame, as well as sustainability of that program. So how do you apply? You would visit the website that you see there on the screen, so that www.ruralvcri.org website. On the application page, under the application requirements section, you would want to review those questions there to determine which of the applications you would apply for, either the Institute application or the LISC application. Both have very, very similar requirements in terms of what's needed for an application, as well as requirements of reporting and responsibilities once you are a grantee. You would then submit that completed application. What does that mean? What is a completed application? That means all responses to all required application questions are completed. You attach your proposal narrative describing the challenge that your agency is looking to address, how you are looking to address that challenge, how you assess that program impact, and the plan for sustainability. One thing that I do want to highlight here, that as a result of the last application cohort, we did increase the proposal narrative limit maximum from 4 pages up to 4 to 6 pages based on feedback from previous applicants. And then the final piece of the completed application is a budget outlining the total requested funding amounts and the budget categories. Going into a little bit more detail on the narrative and the budget piece. The narrative will be uploaded using the provided Word templates. Again, the maximum is 4 to 6 pages, and those sections are going to include a description of the issue, project design and implementation, which includes partnerships, if any or if applicable here, and then the plan for measuring success and outcomes in that sustainability planning piece. The budget will be entered directly into the application, and it will list each item. So that could be personnel, a purchase, a contract, a technology, a software, travel, training costs that funding is being requested to support. You will also need to provide a description and a justification for each of those proposed items that has a clear nexus to the violent crime challenge that you identified in your narrative that you're hoping to impact with this funding. So what are allowable costs, or what could you request funding support for? And there are several examples here on the slide. Allowable budget categories include personnel, hardware or software, equipment, training, travel, consultants, contracts, partners or subawards, and other costs. I'm not going to read all of the examples that you see here on the screen, but just to highlight a few. For instance, we could fund salary or overtime expenditures for personnel that are very, very critical to violent crime reduction operations. The development or acquisition of offender-based risk assessment tools to better help target investigation, interventions, or enforcement. Strategies to more effectively serve and address populations in remote areas, including ways to enhance orders of protection or improve access to services or shelter for remote populations. And then forensic evidence tools and services for identifying suspects or enhancing evidence testimony or outreach to victims. What are unallowable under this award are any pre-award costs or expenditures. So anything that you purchase or do prior to being awarded and the grant term starting for that award would not be allowable. Any land acquisition, any kind of a construction project, firearms and ammunition of any kind, armored vehicles, drones, or tactical equipment used strictly for enforcement purposes. One other item that I will add here is that body-worn cameras, while technically allowable, will likely not be funded under this award because there are 2 existing BJA programs designed to help fund body-worn camera programs. One of those is focused on small and rural departments. So here on the slide, we're going to walk through a couple of allowable budget examples just to give you all something to base your requests off of. So the first sample budget here you can see is asking for salary and fringe for a full-time crime analyst. As well as equipment for that analyst, including the computer for them, crime mapping software, and then support to send both that analyst and the supervisor to training. And then towards the bottom there, you can see they are also requesting funds for 3 poll cameras and overtime for patrol and crime hotspots for a total of $89,000. So as you can see with this example, it's a mixed methods approach, right, in terms of personnel, technology, and specialty deployments. The next budget sample that we have today is focused on crisis intervention teams. So here, this budget is requesting for 20% of the time for a CIT program manager, 20% time for a CIT coordinator, training for 4 deputies in this department, and then also 50% salary for a mental health co-responder for a budget total of $83,000. So with that, we're going to open up our second poll. This second poll is going to ask you, what are you hoping to fund if awarded an RVCRI grant? Your answer options are the budget categories that we talked about just a little bit ago. So hardware or software, personnel, equipment, training, consultants, contracts, travel, partners or subawards, and other. This does allow you for multiple options, so please feel free to check multiple categories there. We'll give you all a few moments to respond to that poll. Okay. So as I look here at some of the answer options that have come in, I see equipment being the top selected option, followed by personnel, hardware and software, and training, which are all very close in terms of selection process there. Okay, great. Thank you all for responding to that poll. We appreciate it. We'll go ahead and close that out. So now that you've heard what's required of an application, what you could potentially fund under that application, let's talk about when those applications would be due. The RVCRI application will always remain open as long as the funding is available. However, we will be reviewing and awarding applications on a rolling cohort basis, with our next deadline being March 31st, 2023. So that will be the next time that we will review the applications for potential awarding. And as I talked about earlier, we were going to provide our contact information in case you have any questions. So you'll see there on the screen, contact information for both the Institute and LISC, as well as on each application portal, there are resources available, as well as on that application page at the bottom. So those the proposal narrative word templates are on the applications, as well as user guides or scoring rubrics. So you'll be able to find those resources in each of the applications there. If you need a resource that you're not able to find, again, feel free to reach out to us to our contact that's there on the screen. So with that, we are going to open it up for questions and answers. So if you haven't already, go ahead and be putting any questions that you have, again, either in the chat or in that Q&A feature that you see at the bottom. We do like to leave a healthy amount of time for questions, given that the last time we hosted an event of this nature, we were not able to address all questions. So please feel free to put those either in the chat or the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And I did, at the beginning of the presentation, I did mention that the webinar will be recorded and placed on the Rural Violent Crime Reduction Initiative website. We will work to get that posted as quickly as possible so that you all may access it. Okay, so we're starting to get some questions in here. Is the grant funding multi-year? So the grant will, maximum grant period will be for up to 24 months. Some may be shorter depending on the program, but that would be the maximum is 2 years. The budgeted amount that you request in the application should cover the entire 2-year period. The ranges that we mentioned earlier, the $25,000 to $150,000 is for the entire grant period, not per year. The second question that I see, are tasers allowable? Tasers would be considered tactical and under that weapon, so tasers will not be funded under this award. I see 2 questions that have kind of a similar feel, so I'm going to answer these together. Does tactical gear include shields, armored vehicles, night vision, vests, things of those natures? So yes, tactical does include armored vehicles. Armored vehicles will not be an allowed expenditure under this award. Anything that is used solely for enforcement purposes is not allowable. So anything such as spike strips, the armored vehicles, anything that potential restraint systems, things of those natures are not going to be allowable. I'm going to pause here and open it up to my colleagues as well to see if John or Juliana have anything to add to this question.
I'll jump in very briefly, Samantha, and I know you emphasized this in discussing allowable versus unallowable costs. Not only what's allowable, but making sure that in applications, applicants clearly demonstrate the nexus between what they're asking and proposing funding support for to the rural violent crime problem they're seeking to address. So we want to make sure that there's a clear connection in those applications between what you're proposing to fund and how that proposed funding is going to address the rural violent crime problem or problems you're seeking to address.
Great, thanks, John. Juliana?
Sam, nothing to add from my end. I think you and John both covered it well there. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. All right. I see a comment question there. You mentioned a tab to check eligibility. Yes, so on the RuralVCRI.org website, once you go to the application page, there's several accordions that you can drop down to see more information. Underneath the requirements tab and the eligibility tab are the tools that I mentioned, as well as the questions to help you determine which application is best suited to address the narrative or the project plan that you're going to submit. Two questions again that I'm going to try to wrap in together here. So are additional vehicles, MDTs or in-car computers allowable? So yes, those are technically allowable. However, as John mentioned just a few moments ago, it will be critical in your proposal narrative to very clearly tie those vehicle requests or those in-car computers to the violent crime challenge that you are looking to address. Our next question that I see here is body cameras or squad cameras eligibility and K9. So body worn cameras, while technically allowable under this program, will likely not be funded because there are two existing body worn camera programs that BJA funds. The overarching body worn camera program, as well as one that is focused on small and rural departments. And actually, if you go onto the Rural Violent Crime Reduction Initiative website under our frequently asked questions section, we do have the links to both of those programs if you are interested in funding body worn cameras. Canines, it is going to depend on the purpose of the canine. And again, it will be critical to tie that canine to the violent crime challenge that you are looking to address. Our next couple of questions are also related to allowability. So two-way radios for co-responder teams, poll cameras, and license plate readers. I'm gonna bring those together. Two-way radios, again, just like with the in-car cameras, technically allowable. However, you will need to very strongly link that to the violent crime that you are looking to address in your area. And then poll cameras and automatic license plate readers are also allowable. We do have several grantees that are currently in the program that have those as components of their narratives. What about allowability for softwares to pull digital forensic evidence from cell phones? Yes, those softwares are allowed. We do have a few agencies that are implementing them as well. If you look on that RVCRI map, like I said, it's interactive once it's on the website. I, of course, had a static screenshot in the presentation. If you hover over it, you can get a little bit more information on what each of those grantees are doing that are currently in the program. Can these funds or grants be used to expand a victim assistance program? It can. We do have currently one police department and one prosecutor's office that are looking to implement or expand victim assistance programs through the hiring of additional personnel or resources, as well as through collaborations through partnerships or providers that they have in their areas. I do want to open it up to John Connolly at LISC here just to see if he has anything to add on the LISC perspective for this question.
Thanks, Samantha. So yeah, very interested in victim services support, whether that's through an eligible applicant such as a law enforcement entity, or if they're looking to partner with community-based organizations to provide enhanced or building upon or starting new victim service support. That would definitely be something we would encourage. And from a LISC standpoint, I'll take the opportunity now to emphasize and encourage, if you're considering a LISC application, that proposing funding to community partners, we think is vital to be able to build out kind of the dynamic cross-sector teams that we hope would be put together to address the violent, rural violent crime problems you're seeking to address.
Great, thanks, John. Are there examples of grantees that have been awarded in the past or a guide? There are application resources and guides on that www.ruralvcri.org website that my co-host has placed in the chat for you all. We don't have previous application examples on the website. However, we are happy to preliminary review applications from a very high level if you would like to submit those for review. Our next question is about allowability for funds. 911 dispatch software that assists dispatchers in working with the caller to talk them through a medical emergency, such as cardiac arrest or blood loss, until law enforcement or fire and or EMS services arrive on the scene. So yes, softwares like that are allowable. Again, it will be critical to tie that in your proposal narrative to how that would impact any violent crime challenges that you are looking to address. As well as here, it looks like you would have a partnership under this potentially with the fire department, as you mentioned, in your local EMS services. So with that application, it would be very beneficial to make sure that they would also be supportive of that. Our next question is if training or equipment amounts are unknown at the time of the application, what is it recommended to fill out for those amounts? So for trainings, you can oftentimes look at previous trainings that provider has hosted in the past to get an estimate for registration costs. So we recommend doing that. If travel support is needed for those trainings, in our budget application piece there, we have put in average higher end average rates following the GSA guidelines. So since this is federal funding, we will follow all GSA guidelines regarding travel in terms of per diem and lodging and hotel allowances. So that even if the location of the training isn't known, know that those are high averages put in there to help estimate. And then in terms of equipment purchases or technology purchases, I would recommend if there is something that you're looking is to potentially get quotes or have, ballpark numbers provided so that you know what to estimate that at prior to submitting the application. So, if you're a little high or, it will cover that cost if your award is approved. So from the Institute side, that's how I would recommend handling those. John, I'll open it up for you on the LISC side if you have any additional guidance that you'd like to provide them.
No, actually, I don't have anything to add on that point, Samantha. I think you did a great job.
Okay, perfect. Our next question is asking about definitions. So for the purpose of this grant, what is considered violent crime? So you have a couple of questions here. I'm going to take them one at a time, and I'm going to start with that one. So violent crime in the context of this grant is a little broader in nature than what one may historically think of for rural violent crime. So what I like to say is it's not just the standard old type 1 like UCR crimes, right? Homicides, assaults, things of that nature are clearly rarely violent. However, we know that there are other types of crimes that, while not in themselves violent, right, often have touch points or spread out to crimes that are violent, such as narcotics trafficking. So in this case, it can cover things like that, right? So the assaults, the homicides, domestic violence, those we classify very clearly as violent crime, but then also those nexus points to narcotics trafficking and things of that nature, how those often spiral out to, potentially assaults or shooting incidents, things that may occur. So those are all considered violent under this award. And then the second part of your question is, would funding be available for a position directed towards sexual crimes and crimes against children and vulnerable populations? So yes, it would. That would come into play with some of the softwares that folks were talking about earlier, as well as personnel can be deployed to focus on those specific violent crimes. Our next question is for the supporting law enforcement and community collaboration partnership application perspective. So John Connolly, if you want to prepare yourself, I'll call on you for this question. Would funding for a courtesy officer or project-specific police substation tied to a rural LIHTC revitalization project be allowed?
Absolutely, and that's music to LISC ears. Thanks for joining us, Scott. Appreciate the question. And for an acronym definition, LIHTC is Low Income Housing Tax Credit. It allows developers to support meeting the very real need of affordable housing in communities across the country. And LISC is heavily involved in that through our National Equity Fund, which is an affiliate for our work in comprehensive community development. Around the specific question, I would just flag unallowable costs, construction, real estate related costs. So actually building out a substation, unfortunately, couldn't be covered. But if you were looking for funding to help staff an office, both from a community and police perspective, to help provide supplies for that office, perhaps there would be some technology associated costs for helping get that office up and running. Absolutely. And particularly from a LISC perspective, we're very much interested in applications along these lines that look to tie in new, existing, or planned revitalization efforts, such as a LIHTC development. So this potential proposal I would submit could be very competitive based on how you put the application together. And I hope that answers the question. Back to you, Sam.
Thank you, John. And thanks for asking that question and for the education. And now knowing that I can say that as a word and not spell the acronym out. So you all taught me something new today. Thank you. Our next question, can you apply for multiple fundings under the same grant for multiple projects? So we do ask that you only submit one application, either under the institute or the policing, either under the institute or LISC at a time. Only one project can be funded under the award at any given time. So in this case, I would really recommend kind of putting the top priority application forward for consideration there. Our next question is, does sex trafficking, does that fall under the violent crime definition? Yes, so we do have several agencies that are current grantees focusing on sex trafficking, not just sex trafficking as well, but also human trafficking in general as a part of their programs. That is completely allowable. And how you choose to address that, right, whether it's through personnel, technologies, things of that nature, you can do a multifaceted approach here. Some of our agencies that are looking to support that can be found on our map so that you can see if what other grantees are looking to address the same or similar issues as you. And then our next question is training for SRO deputies who work in very rural school districts, such as active shooter trainings, other SRO related trainings to prevent, respond, or mitigate crimes in school. Yes, training can be supported in those respects. It sounds like you have a few training options in mind as well for those. I would encourage you as well to check out, if you have not already, the trainings listed under the National Association of School Resource Officers organization. They often have several training topics or best practice sheets up as well. But that is something that can be supported. We do have a current grantee in the Midwest who is actually deploying an SRO program under their funding here. And they did a very, very strong job of linking how that SRO can help impact, potentially prevent crimes that are involving juveniles or youths that are in their schools, but also the staff. So they just know that in your application, make sure that that tie there is strong between that SRO and how it could impact your community. I do see that a couple of folks have their hand raised. So if you have not put your questions in the chat or Q&A feature and you have your hand raised, please do so. We are happy to answer those questions. If we have answered your question already, feel free to use that lower your hand on the bottom of your screen there so that we know that we've addressed your question. And with that, I have come to the end of the questions that are currently in the chat or the Q&A feature there. So if anyone does have any additional questions, I do encourage you to go ahead and thank you before I even finish the sentence. How many cars and or SUVs can be purchased? So that's going to depend on the cost of the vehicles. But again, our grant maximum is up to $150,000 in funding. So it would need to be below that cap. And again, here, as you have heard us all say, that nexus to violent crime in terms of vehicle purchases needs to be very, very clear in your narrative. Okay. All right. So while we give you all the option and the time to fill out some more questions in the chat or Q&A feature, I'm going to open it up to my other co-presenters here if there are any kind of additional comments or frequently asked questions that they've gotten that haven't been asked to date so far. So first, I'll turn it over to John Connolly at LISC. John, anything you want to add for folks or a frequently asked question that you've gotten that hasn't been addressed so far?
Just one final flag, Samantha, and that's around salary and fringe support for personnel. Just a reminder, I believe it was on the unallowable versus unallowable cost discussion, but looking to support existing personnel on projects is definitely an allowable cost in an effort not to be competitive to other funding sources. Using rural violent crime reduction initiative dollars to onboard new sworn personnel likely would run into challenges as an allowable cost. And that's simply a flag for me because it has been a common question that I fielded from interested prospective applicants.
Great. All right. I do see just in that time, we've gotten a couple more questions in the Q&A. So you've said $150,000 is the maximum. Is there a minimum award amount? Yes. The minimum award amount or the minimum request is going to be $25,000. So if we do see a submitted application that is below that threshold, we will reach out to you to let you know that it hasn't quite reached that minimum. So $25,000 will be the minimum. And then what is the total funding available for the program for all agencies applying? So as you probably heard and saw earlier, we did award 33 agencies in our last cohort. In terms of total funding, we do have 2 funding streams here. So we will be able to help a large amount of agencies throughout the program from both the Institute side as well as the LISC side. So we will try to fund as many agencies as we possibly can under the funding. If it gets to the point where the funding, if we are unable to award any additional funds, we will make that announcement. So I will pause here and see if my colleagues, Juliana or John, have anything additional to add on that piece. Or Juliana, I couldn't quite get to you on the frequently asked questions or any other thoughts that you wanted to add before we had some additional questions pop up.
No, not really, Sam. I think the only thing, and this is something that you and John really hit on a lot throughout the process of this webinar, is just really being clear about the nexus between what you're proposing to do and how it relates to the violent crime issue that you've identified in your area. I really think that the map that is on the RVCRI webpage is really helpful if you want to see what other agencies like yours are doing throughout the country to address some of their problems. Feel free to take a look at that. And, Sam and John are fantastic, and the teams at both the Institute and LISC. So if you have any questions, definitely utilize them as a resource. But I think that really overarching, being clear in your proposal about that violent crime challenge that you're facing and how what you're proposing to do will address that. So that's all I have today, but great job, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Wonderful. Thanks, Juliana. I do see we had another question pop up during that as well. So can you purchase training equipment for active shooter trainings and or simulators for training? So yes, training equipment is allowable. If you do look at that map that Juliana just mentioned, we have 2 agencies, both in the Midwest, that are focusing on training components for their respective departments, one of which is focusing on simulators and training that they will be using videos from their own body-worn cameras to feed into the training simulator as well, so that they are training based on incidents or occurrences that have happened in their community specifically to help strengthen their training to officers. And then the other agency is a statewide agency that actually provides training out to departments across that state, and they are enhancing their training capacity and services that they're able to offer. So training coverages like that are allowable under the grant. Okay. All right, and again, that brings us to the end of the questions that are currently in the chat or Q&A feature. So we do have, we are scheduled for an additional 10 minutes for today's event. So do feel free again to continue to add those questions into the chat or the Q&A feature if you do have any additionals. For right now, I will go ahead and bring up that contact information slide again, just for folks to be able to see it. And write down any contact information that they'd like at this point. Again, we will be posting both this recording and a copy of the presentation on the ruralvcri.org website as soon as it's available. So you will have access to this slide at that point in time as well. We want to thank you all for joining us today. If you do not have any other questions, of course, feel free to drop off of the webinar, but we are happy to stay on for the remainder of the time. And I do see we had a question come in. And this is an acronym I'm also not familiar with. So I'm going to ask you to tell me what EVO stands for before I answer your question, or if one of my co-presenters knows, feel free to chime in. Emergency vehicle operations. Okay, thank you. So again, things that are allowable for training are technically allowable under the award. But again, here, especially in this case, you'll want to very clearly tie that to how that specific training and how that training equipment would help improve officers or personnel in their response to violent crime and out in the field. So technically allowable, but how strong that narrative and that nexus to violent crime and the tie to the benefit to investigators or officers responding to that is going to be critical to potential application funding. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. So again, see, you all are wonderful. Just as soon as I start saying this, another question comes in. Do we submit one grant application or grant applications to LISC and RVCRI separately? So you would submit one application either to LISC or under the Institute. We also as well coordinate on our side as partners to ensure that there are no duplicative applications, and if there are, to ensure that it goes to the correct TTA provider for review. So we do ask, though, that one application be submitted as best as possible. John Connolly, anything you'd like to add on that point?
No, I don't believe so, Samantha, but I did see another question come in around the award timeline, so I can cover at least the LISC end and then throw it back to you for the Institute process. So there needs to be some time taken on the LISC end after receiving applications by March 31st to review those, to score them, and then to make initial outreach to awarded grantees, and then develop what we call a grant agreement between LISC and grantees. As you could probably imagine, that can be a process that can take some time. So if we're looking at applications in by March 31st, I don't want to give a specific date, but I'd probably say early to mid-May would be the time we could get grant agreements out the door to you. Samantha?
Great. I think John covered it very well. We have a similar process here at the Institute in terms of needing time after the deadline to review and score applications, as well as to get our grant agreements in place. So I do think the timeline John provided there is very similar on our end as well. So end of March, looking at potentially early May to mid-May timeframe. We do try to be as quick and efficient on those reviews as we possibly can, both the Institute and LISC, because we know that's very exciting to have grant applications in and to know those results. Our next question is, are the numbers listed on there to your office direct phone numbers? So yes, those are direct numbers on the phone for both myself and my colleague Reginald, who is acting as co-host today. And then John, Connolly, that is also your direct line as well, correct?
Correct.
Yep, so those are direct numbers. All right. Okay. All right, so it looks like, as I say these words, those are the last of the questions that I see in the Q&A or the chat feature. So again, we want to thank you all for attending today. We know it can be very challenging to take an hour out of your day to attend events like this, so we do appreciate it. If you do have any additional questions following today's event, feel free to email or call us on the contact information listed. As Juliana and John have both said, we are more than happy to answer those questions and try to be as responsive as we can. So with that, I will open it up for any final comments from my co-hosts, and then we can close out for today's event.
Nothing from me, Sam. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Juliana.
I'm good as well. Thank you so much, Samantha.
All right, perfect. Thank you, John. So again, thank you all for joining us today, and good luck with your applications.